Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, March 10th, 2022. Consumer prices rising in February at a 7.9% annual rate. Levels of inflation not seen since 1982 as the costs of gasoline, housing, and food all soar. President Joe Biden putting much of the blame on Russian President Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, but congressional Republicans disagree. Vice President Kamala Harris in Poland, a NATO country that borders Ukraine, endorsing an international war crimes investigation against Russia, citing yesterday's deadly bombing of a maternity hospital in Mariupol, an attack that Russia now denies carrying out. Vice President also meeting with the Polish president, and the Polish president asked whether his country really did decide, without consulting the U.S., to offer Ukraine those MiG-29 fighter jets, a deal that fell through when the Biden administration did not want to agree to Ukraine's request to transfer the planes through a U.S. airbase in Germany. Back here in Washington, Senate teeing up the full fiscal year government spending bill after the House passed it late Wednesday night, Friday, the deadline to avoid a government shutdown. And Attorney General Merrick Garland asked about appointing a special prosecutor to investigate former President Donald Trump's role in the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. The Attorney General marking 1 year in office. This from CNN. President Joe Biden on Thursday suggested the new Consumer Price Index report showing soaring inflation reflected the pinch Americans are feeling due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine and other factors. Biden said in a statement, today's inflation report is a reminder that Americans' budgets are being stretched by price increases and families are starting to feel the impact of Putin's price hike. A large contributor to inflation this month was the increase in gas and energy prices as markets reacted to Putin's aggressive actions. That was the statement from President Biden. We'll hear from the White House press secretary about this in a moment, but first, here is Senator Deb Fischer, Republican from Nebraska, on Capitol Hill.
Just this morning, we heard that the Consumer Price Index has risen to 7.9% year over year. In the Midwest, that number is higher. It is 8%. So let's take a look at what some of the biggest year-over-year increases are. Fuel oil is up 44%. Used cars are up 41%. Ground beef is up 13.5%. Right now, our farmers are trying to make planting decisions, and they need to make those decisions soon for this season. But they also have to take into account the fact that the cost of fertilizer is up 200%. Gas prices are at an all-time high, and they have been rising for months. This increase isn't just due to what's happening in the Ukraine. It's due to the administration's policies. The national average for a tank of gas is $4.25. And in some areas of the country, it is much higher than that. If you look at all the costs that we are seeing continually rise, that is estimated to have an impact on a typical family of about $2,000 a year. And this is largely erasing any kind of increase that American workers have seen in their wages. Recently, I was at a coffee shop in a small Nebraska community, and the owner of that small business told me that his energy bill, his electric bill, a month ago was about $40. And this month, it was over $300. How are small businesses going to make it when they have input costs that continue to rise? How are people on a fixed income and our seniors going to be able to pay for a tank of gas, to pay for groceries at a grocery store? Inflation is really killing us. And what does the president say? What does President Biden say? He says he can't do much. He can't do much to address, especially rising gas prices. That's unacceptable. We need to restore American energy independence, and we need to look at real solutions on how we can help to drive down these continuing costs and to provide some relief for our families, our businesses, our seniors.
Senator Deb Fischer with other Senate Republicans at a news conference on Capitol Hill today. More from the CNN article on the inflation report. Senate Democrats called on the Biden administration to take more assertive action following the report. Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, who is up for re-election in November, called for passage of his bill to suspend the gas tax. And Senator Joe Manchin, a moderate Democrat from West Virginia, told CNN that more needs to be done. Senator Manchin actually made those comments with a number of reporters in a Senate building hallway.
Do you think inflation now is a threat to our national security because it continues to rise?
Well, it's a threat to the quality of life that people have and depending on. That's the bottom line. We've got to make sure that we do everything we can to fight inflation. It's the number one enemy we have.
And on gas prices, the president said 2 days ago can't do much to bring them down. Has he given up on trying to fix this problem?
I hope not. And we're going to work hard. Basically, we got to produce. We got to get back into action. We got to do everything that we can to have confidence that we're going to produce the energy that we need in our country to defend ourselves, keep ourselves strong, get these prices back down, and be able to defend our allies.
Has the administration done enough to deal with inflation?
We're working on that. And I think my statement today will be very clear where we stand.
But I mean, are you satisfied with what they've done so
far?
far?
No, I think there's a lot more we can do. I really do. We have to get back to the leasing process so people have stability. They understand that we're going to be in this game for a while. We can walk and chew gum. That means you can basically provide the energy that the country needs. The horsepower you receive from fossil, you don't receive that horsepower from renewables. Not yet. We get hydrogen going, we get other things going, and geothermal and all that. We can. We're going to get there, but we're not there yet. So you got to make sure you take care of what you have to take care of. Keep the country strong, have the energy that we need to defend ourselves, to keep ourselves strong, to keep our people basically with a strong economy, but be able to defend our allies. And right now we're not able to do that, and we can. We have to do more of it.
That's Senator Joe Manchin talking with reporters as he was heading into a hearing about energy and the weaponization of it. He is a Democrat from West Virginia, chairs the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. At the White House, Press Secretary Jen Psaki reacting to the inflation report from the Labor Department. Again, consumer prices up at a 7.9% annual rate in February, a 4-decade high.
Question on the economy. The inflation numbers that we received today show consumers paying almost 8% more than a year ago, and this was before Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So how much higher does the administration expect prices to climb?
Well, as you know, a large driver of these inflationary numbers from the last, these monthly numbers, were from energy prices, and we have seen the increase, happen as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So while we're looking at year over year, and there were year over year numbers that came out about a month ago as well, there are still predictions and projections from the Federal Reserve and outside economists about inflation moderating towards the end of the year. Obviously, they make those assessments on a regular basis. But in terms of prices going up, we do anticipate that gas prices and energy prices will go up. That is something that the president has conveyed very clearly to the American public. We also believe it will be temporary and not long-lasting. And what our focus is on now is doing everything we can to mitigate and reduce those prices and ensure there isn't a longer-term impact. So I can't make new projections for you from here other than to convey that, yes, it is accurate that the invasion by President Putin into Ukraine has impacted global inflation in the United States because of the impact it's had on energy prices, and that is a significant contributor to inflation, the inflationary numbers we saw come out today.
You said this is temporary. You've noted before that inflation is going to wane or is expected to wane by the end of the year. Is that still your belief?
That continues to be the projection of the Federal Reserve, of outside economists, and we really rely on them for their projections. But there is also no question that inflation may be higher for the next few months than it would have been without President Putin and Russia's further invasion into Ukraine, particularly due to higher energy prices. And obviously they will watch that, and we are watching that, but that is definitely having an impact.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki with reporters in the White House briefing room. The White House and many Democrats in Congress using the hashtag when they tweet about the inflation report, Putin price hike, but Republican members of Congress using the hashtag Biden inflation. Wall Street today, the Dow down 112, NASDAQ down 125, S&P down 18. Russian President Vladimir Putin also commenting about inflation in the United States. He spoke today at a virtual meeting with his top advisors.
We see the highest inflation in the US in its entire history. So they are trying to blame us for their mistakes. This is evident to the experts, because Russian oil is only 3%, was only 3% of all oil consumed or rather imported by the United States. So they are using this, they are doing this to exploit their own population. They are actually talking and trying to do deals with countries that before they used to impose sanctions on, like Iran or Venezuela. They are sending officials there to sign new agreements with them. The same will happen when it comes with respect to our country as well, and I'm sure of that. Our partners, we will of course talk with our partners who recognize that we are right in this situation, and I would like you to also look into other instruments, rather than other mechanisms that could be used to stabilize the situation. Overall, the situation is normal. I talk to the heads of the regions every day.
Through an interpreter, the Russian President Vladimir Putin, part of his virtual cabinet meeting today with his top advisors. Putin also saying about the sanctions that have been imposed by the U.S. and other Western governments. In the end, this will lead to an increase in our independence, self-sufficiency, and our sovereignty. But a Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, telling reporters on a conference call earlier, our economy is experiencing a shock impact now, and there are negative consequences. Associated Press writes a Russian airstrike at a Mariupol maternity hospital that killed 3 people brought condemnation down on Moscow on Thursday, with Ukrainian and Western officials branding it a war crime, while the highest-level talks yet yielded no progress towards stopping the fighting. Ukrainian authorities said a child was among the dead in Wednesday's airstrike in the vital southern port of Mariupol. 17 people were also wounded, including women waiting to give birth, doctors, and children buried in the rubble. That was from AP. Those peace talks referred to were between Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, and they were held in Turkey. After those talks, at a news conference, Lavrov denied that Russia had bombed that hospital.
As for the maternity ward, it's not for the first time that we see the shouting in relation to so-called atrocities of the Russian military. On the 7th of March, 3 days ago, 7th or 6th of March, can't remember, at the United Nations Security Council, our delegation presented the facts that this maternity ward had been captured by Azov Battalion a long time ago and other radicals. All mothers, all pregnant ladies were taken out of that building, and this was a base of the ultra-radicals Azov. This information had been passed 3 days ago, and so make your own conclusions how the public opinion is being manipulated in the whole world. And I saw these reports today, and of your channel and other Western media. They're very emotional, but unfortunately, the second or the other side of any situation that allows us to create an objective picture never gets quite that much of attention.
Sergei Lavrov is Russia's foreign minister through an interpreter. He was speaking in Turkey after his meeting with the Ukrainian foreign minister, Dmytro Kuleba. Kuleba, after the meeting, spoke with CNBC about Lavrov's comments.
I want to ask you to respond directly to what we heard from Sergei Lavrov just a few moments ago. He essentially told me that this was all Western manipulation and that the Russians didn't, in fact, attack a hospital, a children's hospital, and a ward for pregnant women.
Well, unfortunately, I can confirm that Russian leadership, including Minister Lavrov, they live in their own reality. In our talks behind the closed door, in the absence of the media, he told me, looking in my eyes, that the pictures of pregnant women being taken from under the rubbles of the maternity house are fake. That they hit the maternity house as a military target because the Russian military was absolutely sure that it's under the control of Ukrainian army. And when I said to him, how could pregnant women be pictured there? He said, it's fake. So they live in their own reality, and perhaps it's good for all of us to contain them in that reality. But before doing it, we have to take them out of Ukraine.
The Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba on CNBC after those high-level talks in Turkey with the Russian foreign minister. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris in Poland today showed solidarity for the NATO ally that borders Ukraine. At a joint press conference with the Polish president, Harris asked about calls for an international war crimes investigation of Russia over its invasion in Ukraine. Harris endorsing the idea and cited yesterday's attack on that hospital as in Mariupol.
When it comes to crimes and violations of international norms and rules, we are also very clear that any intentional attack on innocent civilians is a violation. The UN has set up a process by which there will be a review and investigations, and we will, of course, participate as appropriate and necessary. But we all watched the television coverage of just yesterday. That's on top of everything else that we know and don't know yet, based on what we've just been able to see. And because we've seen it or not doesn't mean it hasn't happened. But just limited to what we have seen. Pregnant women going for health care, being injured by, I don't know, a missile, a bomb, in an unprovoked, unjustified war, where a powerful country is trying to take over another country, violate its sovereignty, its territorial integrity, for the sake of what? Nothing that is justified or provoked? Absolutely there should be an investigation, and we should all be watching. And I have no question the eyes of the world are on this war and what Russia has done in terms of this aggression and these atrocities. I have no doubt.
Vice President Kamala Harris in Warsaw, Poland. This from Fox News. Vice President Harris and the Polish President Andrzej Duda insisted Thursday that the U.S. and Poland are unified after the U.S. rejected the country's proposal to send MiG-29 planes to the Ukrainian military. Poland wanted to first send the jets to a U.S. air base in Germany and then be given the chance to buy F-16s to replace them. The Pentagon raising concerns about planes flying from the U.S. base in a NATO country into combat with Russian forces, and it could escalate the war. The Polish President Duda asked today whether reports that Poland decided to make the offer without consulting the U.S. or NATO first, whether those reports are true.
We accept that they have the right to demand this assistance from the international community. They can demand this support from NATO. We are providing them humanitarian assistance and material assistance the best we can. We are trying to do our best. Some expectations were addressed in a very strong and unequivocal way also towards us, towards Poland. However, we are members of the North Atlantic Alliance, and as far as security-related issues are concerned, we have to look at these not only through our own lens, through the prism of the security of Poland, but we also have to adopt the perspective of the security of NATO as a whole. So in a nutshell, we have to be a responsible member of the North Atlantic Alliance. That is why there were requests addressed to us. Those requests were addressed to us by the Ukrainian side and also to a certain extent by the media. We behaved in such a way as a reliable member of NATO should behave. a member of NATO who does not want to expose NATO to any difficult situation. On the other hand, we, as members of NATO, also wanted and want to look for ways of support for the fight in Ukraine. And that is why we formulated a statement together with the Polish government, so myself as president, together with the Polish government. And this statement, this declaration, was announced by the Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs. It talked about the Polish possibilities, military possibilities of assisting Ukraine. Simply, we decided to put those jets at the disposal of NATO, not expecting anything in return, because we stressed very clearly that as a gap filler for the donated equipment, we were able to buy something that we would need as a replacement, and we ourselves were ready to provide our equipment free of charge. But we wanted NATO as a whole to make a common decision so that Poland remains a credible member of NATO, not a country who decides on its own on important issues which impact the security of NATO as a whole, which would impact the security of all members of NATO, also our neighbors who are part of NATO, members of NATO.
The Polish President Andrzej Duda through an interpreter at a joint news conference in Warsaw with U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris. By the way, former U.S. Vice President Mike Pence also in Poland today, along with the former Second Lady Karen Pence, meeting with refugees from Ukraine along the border. They're traveling with the evangelical Christian humanitarian organization Samaritan's Purse and that group's vice president, Edward Graham, son of the group's president and evangelical pastor, Franklin Graham. UN estimating that total Ukrainian refugees fleeing to Poland and other countries now at 2.3 million in just 2 weeks of war, and another 1.9 million Ukrainians are displaced within the country. More on that offer from Poland to send the fighter jets to Ukraine, the Biden administration rejecting it. Back in Washington, D.C., a Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing with the chair, Bob Menendez, Democrat from New Jersey, questioning Assistant Secretary of State Jessica Lewis and Assistant Defense Secretary Mara Garland.
There is a bipartisan support for providing Ukraine with fighter jets of neighboring countries that they would know how to fly and engage in. And I understand that the Polish decision may have complicated how we achieve that. But what is our present status in terms of exploring potential paths to providing fighter jets to Ukraine?
Thank you, Senator. And I know that this is something that's very much on the committee's minds. Secretary Blinken actually addressed this yesterday, and I'll comment and then happy to turn it over to Dr. Garland as well. Look, we understand, first of all, when it comes to the planes, that it's up to any country, it's a sovereign decision about the transfer of the planes. And as you noted, that there were some complexities with the plan that was provided. And we heard yesterday from the Department of Defense on that particular proposal. At this point, we are consulting very closely with Poland and our other NATO allies on the best way forward. We are working hard on this, and as that consultation develops, we will stay in close touch with you and the committee to make sure that you have the information.
The time is of the essence. The Ukrainians are getting bombarded, and they do not have, as least as their country's leaders suggest and assert, that they do not have the wherewithal to compete in the sky. And so I understand why NATO and the United States are not engaged in a no-fly zone that has potential direct conflict with Russia, but I don't understand why we are not working expeditiously to facilitate planes to Ukraine.
Go ahead.
Thank you for raising this issue, Senator. And looking holistically, of course, I would just cite the tremendous statement by Assistant Secretary Lewis in her opening remarks about the unprecedented level of support to Ukraine. It has been extraordinary.
I'm talking about planes. I have no doubt that we have been giving enormous assistance to Ukraine. We're going to vote hopefully today and continuing to do that. I'm talking specifically about planes.
Absolutely, Senator. Thank you for that. We're really focusing in particular on what we see as them needing most, anti-armor and air defense capabilities. Ukraine's Air Force does have several squadrons of mission-capable aircraft in this contested airspace. But what we are seeing is that they really need greater air defense. And frankly, as we and our allies and partners are rushing this assistance to them, we are seeing the operational impact of it on the battlefield every single day.
So you're saying they don't need airplanes?
What I am saying, sir, is that we are trying to provide everything we can that really helps them with air defense, and we don't see significant effectiveness tied to those airplanes specifically.
Well, if we're giving them air defense other than airplanes, we better give it to them soon. The horrific pictures yesterday, or today's news, about the bombing of a maternity hospital. If we cannot be moved by that, I don't know what we can be moved by. So I'm not going to belabor the point except to say either we're going to get them some air defense systems that they can protect themselves with, or we need to engage with them in terms of the jet question.
Senator Bob Menendez chairs the Foreign Relations Committee, Democrat from New Jersey, questioning two witnesses today, Assistant Secretary of State Jessica Lewis and Assistant Defense Secretary Merrick. Several Senate Republicans also today expressing support for somehow getting those jet planes to Ukraine. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has been pleading for either more combat airplanes or that NATO enforce no-fly zone over Ukraine. At another U.S. Senate hearing today, Lieutenant General Scott Berrier, director of DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, was asked for his take on how the control of the skies over Ukraine has been going during the war.
My assessment is that the Ukrainians have been somewhat effective with the assets and resources that they have. The Russians have not achieved what I would call air dominance or air superiority over the country of Ukraine right now. That said, they are taking some losses, and they do need additional assets. Weapons like Stingers have moved in, and they have been used with effect, and I think the Ukrainians will continue to be able to use those in small unit tactics with great effect. Certainly, additional assets and resources with UAVs and aircraft, I'm sure they could make very good use of that.
Lieutenant General Scott Berrier is director of the Defense Intelligence Agency at today's Senate Intelligence Committee hearing. It also included testimony from the heads of the FBI, CIA, National Security Agency, and National Intelligence Directorate. Another issue that came up, possible use of biological weapons in this war. Russia has accused the U.S. of operating biowarfare laboratories in Ukraine. White House calling those allegations preposterous. And the head of the director of national intelligence, Avril Haines, today saying that Ukraine does not produce weapons or conduct dangerous research, and that the U.S. has provided assistance to the labs in the context of biosafety in the past. Senator Susan Collins, Republican of Maine, asking CIA Director William Burns about the possibility, as been reported, that Russia may be setting the stage for its own use of these weapons by planting the false story.
Director Burns, you have always shown extraordinary insight into Putin's thinking. We all read about the Russian Defense Ministry publicly accusing Ukraine of possibly planning a false flag chemical weapon attack. What do you make of that? Does that signal that Putin intends to launch a chemical or biological weapon attack on the Ukrainians?
Well, thanks very much, Senator. I mean, I think it underscores the concern that all of us need to focus on those kind of issues, whether it's the potential for a use of chemical weapons either as a false flag operation or against Ukrainians. This is something, as all of you know very well, is very much a part of Russia's playbook. They've used those weapons against their own citizens. They've at least encouraged the use in Syria and elsewhere. So it's something we take very seriously. And it's one of the reasons, as Director Haynes said earlier, that I am convinced that our efforts at selective declassification to preempt those kind of false flag efforts and the creation of false narratives have been so important. In all the years I spent as a career diplomat, I saw too many instances in which we lost information wars with the Russians. In this case, I think we have had a great deal of effect in disrupting their tactics and their calculations and demonstrating to the entire world that this is a premeditated and unprovoked aggression built on a body of lies and false narratives. So this is one information war that I think Putin is losing.
CIA Director William Burns at today's Senate Intelligence Committee hearing, questioned by Senator Susan Collins, Republican from Maine. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson also weighing in on this, telling Sky News that biological weapons in Ukraine and the fake news of that could be a pretext by Russia to use those weapons. He said, "The stuff which you are hearing about chemical weapons is straight out of their playbook. You have seen it in Syria. You saw it even in the UK. It is a cynical, barbaric government, I'm afraid." This is Washington Today. This from the Associated Press about another global hotspot. Military investigations have found poor leadership, inadequate training, and a culture of complacency among U.S. forces undermine efforts to fend off a 2020 attack by militants in Kenya that killed 3 Americans. Pentagon briefing today, AFRICOM Commander General Stephen Townsend on the review of what happened in 2020.
At 5:20 a.m. on January 5th, 2020, a ruthless and determined enemy force of approximately 30 to 40 al-Shabaab fighters conducted a complex attack against U.S. forces and assets at Mandabey, Kenya. In a few short minutes, the attacking enemy inflicted casualties and destroyed 7 contracted light aircraft and other property before they were effectively engaged by U.S. and Kenyan forces and forced to withdraw with a loss of at least 6 enemy killed. The investigation determined the proximate cause of the loss of lives and materiel was the attack by a mass force of determined, disciplined, and well-resourced al-Shabaab fighters. The investigation also identified 4 broad factors that contributed to the outcome of the attack and the resultant losses. First, an inadequate focus on potential threats and force protection at multiple levels. For a number of successive years, there was complacent leadership and command and control at the tactical level and poor oversight at the operational level. Second, there was an inadequate understanding of the true threat to the base at Mandabey that had been perpetuated by years of local threat assessments. There were also shortcomings identified in the resourcing, sharing, and dissemination of intelligence. Third, there were deficiencies in the organization, preparation, and training of security forces, which contributed to inadequate defensive plans. Fourth, there were problems with mission command, including poor unity of command at the tactical level and flawed staff processes that failed to account for the growth of CSL Mandabey from a training base to a counterterrorism support and air base. As I said in March 2020, we were not as prepared at Mandabey as we needed to be. Security on a key part of the base proved inadequate, with a security force that was insufficiently prepared for their mission. U.S. AFRICOM has implemented a series of measures to address the shortfalls uncovered during this investigation and the independent review. These include adjustments to training, operations, threat assessments, leadership, and force protection practices.
General Stephen Townsend is commander of AFRICOM, Africa Command, at today's Pentagon briefing. Washington Today continues in a minute.
Listen to C-SPAN Radio with our free mobile app, C-SPAN Now. Get complete access to what's happening in Washington, wherever you are, with live streams of floor proceedings and hearings from the U.S. Congress, White House events, the courts, campaigns, and more. Plus analysis of the world of politics with our informative podcasts. C-SPAN Now is available at the Apple Store and Google Play. Download it for free today. C-SPAN Now, your front row seat to Washington, anytime, anywhere.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. A few more headlines. Associated Press reporting that the Transportation Security Administration will be extending the nationwide mask mandate for airplanes, buses, and other mass transit for 1 month through April 18th. It had been set to expire a week from tomorrow. But the extension is to give the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention more time to develop new guidelines based on their new COVID-19 community levels standard, and that should ease the need for masks, since more than 90% of the U.S. population now in areas with low or medium COVID-19 community levels, where public face masks are no longer recommended in indoor settings. And Major League Baseball players voting to accept the management's latest offer for a new labor deal, ending a 99-day lockout and salvaging the full 162-game regular season. ESPN says it's going to start on April 7th. Some of the agreement includes a bonus pool worth $50 million to be distributed among younger players who haven't reached salary arbitration thresholds, expanding the league's postseason to 12 teams, and putting advertisements now on uniforms and bats. From thehill.com, the House passed a sweeping $1.5 trillion omnibus spending package on Wednesday night to fund the government, hours after lawmakers scrapped billions in funding to combat the COVID-19 pandemic amid resistance from Democrats, upset about plans to yank already allocated relief from states. Well, that now slightly slimmed-down bill is in the Senate, and Majority Leader Chuck Schumer speaking about it on the floor.
So last night, the House of Representatives passed the strongest, boldest, and most significant government funding package we've seen in a very long time, bringing us one step closer to fully funding the government for the 2022 fiscal year. Now, as we all know, funding the government's a basic responsibility of Congress, but rarely does this responsibility arrive at such a critical moment for our country and for the world. War has erupted in Europe, and Americans are looking to relief from rising costs, and this package is critical for facing these challenges. After weeks of hard work, I'm pleased to report that this bipartisan funding package represents a robust and unapologetic investment in the American people. It will give our troops a raise, provide more money for schools and Head Start programs and Pell Grants, reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act, fund the President's Cancer Moonshot, and open the floodgates for funding the bipartisan infrastructure law. This funding bill is overflowing with very good things for our troops, for American jobs, for our families, and for America. Once this bill arrives at the Senate, Republicans must work with Democrats to pass the bill as soon as possible, hopefully tonight. There is every reason in the world to believe that we can arrive at a path forward quickly. For one, the people of Ukraine need our immediate help, and this omnibus is the quickest and most direct way of getting them the help fast. At nearly $14 billion, Congress will approve more than double what the administration originally requested for Ukraine aid, and that is a huge accomplishment.
The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, opening up the Senate Thursday morning. Also talking about this omnibus spending bill to fund the federal government through the rest of the fiscal year through the end of September, the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell.
Our recent negotiations put us Republicans in the surreal position of having to push a commander-in-chief's party into giving his own commanders the funding they need. But over many Democrat objections, Republicans made sure this deal gets the job done for our armed forces. The compromise product provides significantly more money than the Biden administration had requested for defense, and significantly less than they requested for non-defense. Until 24 hours ago, this compromise was also going to reprogram money away from Democrats' wasteful spending spree that neglected COVID needs and reallocate it to vaccines and treatments for the American people. But House Democrats mutinied against Speaker Pelosi. The far left would rather preserve state and local bureaucrats' giant slush funds than fund vaccines and therapeutics for our citizens. So the COVID component has fallen out. Overall, this agreement checks the three boxes I laid out months ago. The bill maintains parity between defense and non-defense spending growth. It maintains long-standing bipartisan policies such as protecting taxpayers against funding abortions and being politically targeted by the IRS. And new far-left poison pills were cut out. But most urgently, amid this war in Europe, this agreement delivers both the urgent aid the Ukrainians need right now and a down payment on our commitment to keep defending America and global peace in the years to come.
Senator Mitch McConnell, Minority Leader, Republican from Kentucky, on the Senate floor. More from the Hill article. House lawmakers also passed a stopgap measure by voice vote that lasts until Tuesday to ensure the Senate has enough time to clear the omnibus package without risking a government shutdown, because current funding expires midnight Friday. And also, Senator John Kennedy, Republican from Louisiana, quoted in the article, fuming after the closed-door lunch today about the process, noting that senators were having to vote on a massive bill with little time to read it. President Biden hosting the President of Colombia, Iván Duque Márquez, at the White House. A key topic, immigration.
And I want to thank you, Mr. President, for your leadership on issues that matter to everyone in this region. Combating the pandemic, advancing health security, taking on the climate crisis with urgency and genuine ambition, and for welcoming refugees from Venezuela and working toward an orderly, secure, and humane way to tackle the unprecedented levels of migration. Colombia has done an incredible job, and I know the political consequences for taking that kind of stand, which is the right stand, but not always most popular. Our hemisphere migration challenges cannot be solved by one nation or at any one border. We have to work together. And so today, I'm calling for a new framework of how nations throughout the region can collectively manage migration in the Western Hemisphere. There's something we've been discussing with partners throughout the region, including you, Mr. President. And our goal is going to be to sign a regional declaration on migration and protection in June in Los Angeles when the United States hosts the Summit of the Americas, which we talked a little bit about. And this can't be a piecemeal approach in my view. It needs to include far more support for countries like Colombia that are hosting the lion's share of the refugees and migrants. It's an obligation of all of us, not just Colombia. And it needs to include far more support, as I said. And it needs to dramatically expand access to resettlement and other legal pathways to migration. And it needs to aggressively pursue the criminal smugglers and traffickers who prey on all these folks for profit. That's the best way, in my view, for us to live up to our collective values and welcome immigrants and refugees, keep migrants safe, and secure all our countries.
President Biden at the White House meeting with the President of Colombia. He was elected in 2018. President today also designating Colombia as a major non-NATO ally, saying, I've said for a long time Colombia is a keystone to our shared efforts to build a hemisphere as prosperous, secure, and democratic. Other major countries getting this designation include South Korea, Australia, Argentina, and Kuwait. From NBC News, the federal government's new top prosecutor for serious fraud against the massive pandemic relief program is setting up teams to analyze what he has called an almost shocking amount of data that could bring new charges. Kevin Chambers, who was serving as Associate Deputy Attorney General, was named Chief Prosecutor for COVID-19 fraud on Thursday by the Justice Department. President Joe Biden said in his State of the Union address that the prosecutor would lead the charge against major perpetrators of pandemic fraud. That was from NBC News, who spoke with Kevin Chambers. Chambers later sat in on the COVID-19 fraud task force at the Justice Department right next to the Attorney General.
I'm honored to take on this new role
And I'm excited to continue to work with the women and men at the Department of Justice and also with all of you at the law enforcement agencies and offices of Inspector General that have been such good partners to us. I've had the privilege over the past year to work with all of you and your teams on the COVID-19 Fraud Enforcement Task Force. And I've seen firsthand the dedication and the hard work that they all bring to the effort. And I've also seen the results. As you've heard, you've brought criminal and civil cases against thousands of individuals and entities alleging billions of dollars in fraud. And that's impressive, and it's made all the more impressive by the fact that all of that was accomplished in the course of an unprecedented global crisis. Now, the work is by no means done, as the Deputy Attorney General said. But the work to this point has been extraordinary, and I'm looking forward to building on that work and redoubling our efforts to identify pandemic fraud, to charge and prosecute those individuals responsible for it, and whenever possible, to recover funds stolen from the American people. And we're going to do it using tools that we've long used to fight crime, but we're going to use some new tools that we've developed since the beginning of this pandemic when our law enforcement efforts began. Now, we're going to target large-scale criminal organizations who are committing some of the largest and far-ranging fraud, many of them using identity theft to victimize Americans who so needed this relief. We're also going to prioritize overseas actors who saw our government's relief packages as an opportunity for personal gain. There's a lot of work for us to do, but there's no doubt in my mind that this group is up to the task. Sir, ma'am, thank you for your leadership and for this opportunity, and I look forward to the work ahead. Thank you.
Kevin Chambers, COVID-19 Fraud Chief Prosecutor, just named, speaking at the Justice Department, getting applause from, among the audience, sitting next to him, the Attorney General Merrick Garland, and he mentioned the Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco. U.S. Secret Service has estimated that $100 billion was stolen from pandemic relief funds meant for businesses and unemployed Americans. Merrick Garland himself, at a separate event at the Justice Department today, speaking about his first year in office. He was confirmed by the Senate and sworn in March 11th of 2021. It's tomorrow. Garland also taking reporters' questions, and one of them was about the investigation into the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol and how far an investigation should go into the actions of former President Donald Trump.
You said that you don't want any decisions here to be made based on partisan concerns or politics. The Republicans have said that any investigation into former President Trump is inherently political. Questions about the former president, they really cast a shadow over your first year here. Would you consider appointing special counsel to examine questions of possible criminal conduct by the former president?
So I'm not going to talk about individuals who may or may not be subjects of investigations. I want to say two things about the question, though. We don't talk about how we would do investigations or how we are doing investigations. It's a norm of the department. I will say generally about this thought about what's political and what's not political. We do not shy away from cases that are controversial or sensitive or political. To do that would undermine an element of the rule of law, which is that we treat like cases alike without regard to the subject matter. What we will avoid and what we must avoid is any partisan element of our decision-making about cases. That is what I'm intent on ensuring, that the department's decisions are made on the merits and that they're made on the facts and the law, and they're not based on any kind of partisan considerations.
Attorney General Merrick Garland at the Justice Department, an event that marked his 1 year in that position. The January 6th Select Committee in the House of Representatives has filed some court papers that indicated possible criminal activity by former President Donald Trump. Newsweek has an article that reads, former U.S. Army prosecutor Glenn Kirchner concluded that former President Donald Trump will be charged in connection with the January 6, 2021 riot at the U.S. Capitol and the effort to overturn the 2020 election results. after new remarks from Attorney General Merrick Garland. It's not the ones that you heard. The article in Newsweek goes on. In an interview with NPR that aired on Thursday, Garland said everyone who committed crimes related to January 6th would face accountability. Supreme Court nominee Judge Katanji Brown Jackson has been meeting with senators one-on-one all week ahead of her confirmation hearing before the Judiciary Committee, which begins March 21st and will run 4 days, according to the chairman. Today, a few of the senators on that committee meeting with her and then speaking with reporters after. We start with Chris Coons, Democrat from Delaware.
Good morning. I just had the opportunity to meet in person with Judge Katanji Brown Jackson, who's been nominated for the U.S. Supreme Court. I've read into her background, some of her decisional record on the D.C. District Court. She has a shorter decisional record on the D.C. Circuit Court, and I find her to be exceptionally well qualified, a person of great warmth, character, and engagement, and I frankly would struggle to see how someone would not vote to confirm this historic nominee to serve on the United States Supreme Court.
So the minority on the Judiciary Committee has expressed some concerns about the timeline for the hearing and for confirmation. What's your response to that?
Having served on the Judiciary Committee for the last 3 nominees to the U.S. Supreme Court, I'm struck at the tension between their expressing concern about this timeline and the timeline of the last confirmation, which was, I believe, 16 days from nomination to confirmation. This will be longer than that. You can't have one standard for a nominee of a Republican president and another standard for a nominee of a Democratic president. I think, given how recently she's been before the committee, how transparent and public her record is, the 24 days, I believe it will be, from nomination to the beginning of the hearing process is sufficient.
How likely is it, do you think, that there will be more than just a few Republicans that vote for her confirmation?
I don't know yet. I am going to begin talking with my colleagues about my impressions of her and her record and what she would bring to the court. One of the things I said when Justice Breyer announced his impending retirement was that his contribution to the court was not just as a great legal mind and a strong writer, but someone who helped shape consensus, not always majority opinions, but remember, the overwhelming majority of decisions by the Supreme Court are unanimous. So he helps shape decisions. I believe that Judge Jackson, were she to become Justice Jackson, would serve in the model of Justice Breyer as someone with a distinct view of the Constitution and the role of the courts, but who also would be engaging personally, and whose decisional style and approach would be to reach consensus rather than only write, minorities, dissents, things like that. So.
This meeting obviously went a little long.
So we were enjoying ourselves. Forgive me. Some of what I was enjoying doing was getting to ask questions about her children, her family, her background, her life experience. We're both debate nerds, so we did a little bonding on that. I asked her some questions that I will admit are of personal interest, but a tad obscure in patent policy, that I will probably not be spending time in her confirmation hearing on. Delaware happens to have the busiest patent litigation court in America. On the subcommittee, I've done a lot of work on patentability standards. It's not an area that she's got great depth in, but it's also an area that very few federal judges have great depth in, and that's our problem. So.
And how do you respond to some of the concerns? I mean, because you acknowledge that obviously her record is slimmer on the circuit court level, so did she address that in any way?
There are several other currently serving justices who were on the D.C. Circuit for a comparably brief period of time. I don't think that's any bar. She has previously practiced as an appellate lawyer, and I think she's perfectly comfortable with and capable of fully executing the appellate role, the unique appellate role of the U.S. Supreme Court.
Senator Chris Coons, Democrat from Delaware, member of the Judiciary Committee, with reporters outside his office after meeting with Supreme Court nominee Katanji Brown Jackson. Another senator in that position, member of the committee, met with the nominee today. A Republican, John Cornyn of Texas, also spoke with reporters in the hallway.
How did it go?
She's a very charming person, and I think one of the things I do appreciate about her experience is she's had a pretty varied experience. A lot of the Supreme Court justices are academics and people that haven't really had a lot of real-world experience, but she's been a public defender. She's been a trial judge and then, of course, a judge on the D.C. Circuit. And my bias is I appreciate somebody who's had that kind of experience serving on an appellate court, because I was a trial judge myself for 6 years in the state system and then on the Supreme Court of Texas. But she was charming.
Well, calling on your background, do you have any criteria that you'd like to see in a Supreme Court justice?
Well, I asked her what she thought about people thinking she would be a predictable vote for one position or another. And she said, I don't really like being pigeonholed in any particular way. But of course, as you know, that's sort of how this is being cast, as she's a replacement for Justice Breyer, one of the more liberal members of the court. But I'm sure she's, I think she's certainly well qualified by virtue of her experience and her credentials. And the real question is going to be, does she view this as a judicial role or just another political branch of government? That's really to me, the essence of what we ought to be looking at on these Supreme Court nominees, because this shouldn't just be another place that you go after you lose the election or you lose the vote in Congress. You then go to court and say, okay, help me out. I want to get this particular result. So I thought she had given me good, interesting, and thoughtful answers, and I thought it went reasonably well.
Given the recent history of the nominee controversies that have happened, including those with political overtones, do you think her nomination and possibly her selection as a justice will kind of quell the idea of adding to the Supreme Court bench to balance out what some perceive as an imbalance right now?
Well, she was a law clerk to Justice Breyer, and I had said that I appreciate Justice Breyer's philosophy when it comes to judging. He didn't view the Supreme Court as another political branch, and thus he disagreed with those who said we ought to pack the court with more liberal justices to change the balance of power on the court. And in particular, that was an argument that Lawrence Tribe, one of the liberal legal professors from Harvard, has made. So she pretty much said she's going to have more of a Breyer-like approach to the job.
You seem a little bit open to supporting her, it sounds like, Dan. And also, kind of off topic, well, definitely off topic, what the heck's going to happen with the omnibus? What are you hearing and stuff?
I'm hearing we may finish that tonight, the omnibus. But I haven't made up my mind on whether to vote for her or not. I did not vote for her circuit court nomination. She was not particularly forthcoming on what I consider to be a very important question, is her judicial philosophy. And so we'll be probing a little bit more of that. Unfortunately, I think by the time these nominees come to us, they've already been coached and told not to answer questions. And sometimes that gets to be a frustrating experience. But I'll try to keep an open mind.
Senator John Cornyn, Republican from Texas, member of the Judiciary Committee, with reporters outside his office after today's meeting he had with the Supreme Court nominee, Judge Katanji Brown Jackson. Stay with C-SPAN for complete coverage of the confirmation process from the Judiciary Committee hearings, which will start March 21st and scheduled to run 4 days. And then if she gets out of committee by a positive vote, then it's Senate floor consideration, debate, and vote. And thanks for listening to Washington Today. You can get more top Washington stories sent to you each day with C-SPAN's evening newsletter, Word for Word. Subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Hope you have a good night.